The ninja were never meant to be seen, not on the battlefield, not in history. Their greatest weapon wasn't assassination, it was invisibility. This is the untold secret behind the hidden life of the ninja. If you enjoy history beyond myths and movies, subscribe to Fragments of History, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. The ninja existed because feudal Japan's system of honor had no place for them. In a society ruled by samurai code and rigid hierarchies, anyone who fought without ceremony lived outside legitimacy. The ninja weren't outcasts by choice. They were necessity, given a body. People whose survival depended on being unseen, not only during missions, but in the shape of their entire lives. Asymmetric warfare was their world. While samurai advanced beneath banners and shouted names, ninja moved in ways that made victory certain rather than glorious. They poisoned water, they set fires, they fed lies into the enemy's bloodstream until allies became threats before a blade ever met flesh. This wasn't cowardice, it was calculation. A ninja who fought fairly was a ninja who died for nothing. Everything they did contradicted what samurai culture praised. Honor meant declaring yourself. Honor meant meeting death with your name on your tongue. Honor meant giving your family something to inherit, deeds to turn into reputation. For the ninja, those were luxuries. Visibility didn't earn respect. It attracted execution. Status decided what a person could be. Samurai held the warrior class, secured by bloodlines and official posts. Beneath them came farmers, artisans, merchants, each with a recognized place and a role that could be spoken aloud. The ninja lived between categories, neither peasant nor warrior in any official sense. They served lords who demanded results, yet could never admit how those results were obtained. That lack of status was a wound and a shield. A samurai who succeeded brought honor to his master's name. A ninja who succeeded left only outcomes and no one to blame. When a rival daimyo died without warning, there were no banners to point at the hand responsible, no family name to curse, no grave to desecrate. Anonymity wasn't an aesthetic, it was the entry fee to a game where being recognized meant being erased. Power outside the samurai system required methods the system could never sanction. Lords employed ninja because some tasks couldn't be done through legitimate channels. Political assassination, intelligence stolen from inside enemy walls, sabotage that could ignite conflict without declaring it. Operations like these needed people who could move through society without leaving anything that could be filed, named, or traced. Invisibility became more than a tactic. It became protection from existence itself. A known ninja was a dead ninja. Once identified, they became targets not only for enemies, but for the very lords who hired them. A tool that could be turned back on its owner was a tool that had to be disposed of. The ninja who lived long enough understood a brutal truth. Their usefulness depended on never being connected to their work. So anonymity became law. They did not boast. They did not collect trophies. They did not trade stories of their missions unless necessity forced it. Every detail shared was a thread. Pull enough threads and the entire life came apart. Names had to stay fluid. Histories had to be invented. Even appearance was something to be changed, dulled, rearranged, whatever kept the eyes of others from fixing on them too long. And the double life wasn't occasional, it was constant. By day, a ninja might pass as a traveling merchant, a Buddhist monk, a minor bureaucrat, a humble farmer. The cover had to be lived with total conviction because one inconsistency, one wrong word, one unfamiliar habit could trigger suspicion. Neighbors had to believe the performance. Family members who weren't part of the work had to believe it too. The mask didn't come off because underneath was something society had no language for. Living in shadow demanded a price war. Alone could not. Battles end, missions conclude, but invisibility never stopped. A ninja could not relax into authenticity. They could not form ordinary relationships without risk. Every conversation was a possible interrogation. Every friendship was a liability waiting for the wrong season. Trust became the most dangerous indulgence. This is how you create a human being who moves like a ghost wearing skin. They witnessed history up close, then vanished from it. They held skills that rivaled or surpassed many samurai and received none of the recognition. They protected lords and collapsed rival powers only to become a silence in the record, because history prefers heroes with faces and names. The price of power without status was permanent concealment. Ninja learned to measure success not in glory, but in survival, not in legacy, but in completion. They trained themselves to smother ego, to find identity in absence rather than presence. This was not the path of a warrior chasing immortality through deeds. It was the path of an operative who understood that the highest achievement was being forgotten. But why accept a life like that? What makes men and women choose invisibility over honor, silence over praise? For many, it wasn't a choice. It was the only path available to people born outside the system. People who carried abilities the system needed, yet could never admit it needed. The ninja existed because feudal Japan's perfect hierarchy had imperfect needs. And to meet those needs, everything had to be built where society couldn't look. The training that shaped them, the families that produced them, the techniques that defined them. Because once you stepped into the world of shadows, there was no clean way back into the light. The transformation from person to ghost began early, quietly, deliberately, and in places no one was meant to notice. The sun rose over rice fields, where a man bent to his work with the practiced movements of someone who had done this labor for years. His hands were calloused from the hoe. His back carried the familiar ache of agricultural toil. Neighbors greeted him with the easy familiarity reserved for the unremarkable. They had no reason to suspect that these same hands could kill silently in 7 different ways, or that this tired farmer had slipped into a magistrate's compound 3 nights earlier and left without a trace. The double life was not a disguise worn when convenient. It was a sustained performance that demanded total commitment. A ninja posing as a farmer had to farm. The crops had to grow. The harvest had to come in. Any deviation from the expected patterns of agricultural life invited questions, and questions narrowed into scrutiny no operative could survive. The cover was not a mask you put on. It was a parallel existence maintained with relentless attention to detail. Merchants moved through society with a freedom farmers could never claim. They crossed domains, entered castles under the pretense of selling goods, and gathered information through the natural flow of commerce. A ninja operating as a merchant learned the real rhythms of trade, market prices, seasonal shifts, the etiquette of negotiation. His cart carried honest merchandise and hidden compartments for weapons, documents, or whatever a mission demanded. Customers received fair value because anything less created friction. Friction created memory, and memory was the first step toward being seen. The Buddhist monk offered another kind of cover. Monasteries sat at the edge of normal hierarchy. Their inhabitants spared many of the rigid protocols that governed civilian life. A monk could travel without suspicion, seek shelter in noble houses, and ask questions that would seem intrusive from anyone else. The spiritual role opened doors because people spoke differently in the presence of someone presumed to have transcended worldly concerns. Confessions came easier. Loose words spilled. But the identity required discipline, knowledge of texts, ritual performed correctly, counsel delivered with the weight of someone who sounded believable when speaking of suffering. Servants lived inside the most intimate spaces of any household, while remaining functionally invisible to their masters. A ninja who entered service in a target's residence became a fixture, moving through private chambers, overhearing guarded conversations, reaching documents and valuables even trusted retainers might never touch. The servant's invisibility was social rather than physical. Masters spoke freely because low status made the listener inaudible. It was the perfect metaphor for the ninja's entire existence, present, unacknowledged, watching everything while being overlooked. None of these lives carried visible symbols of what lay beneath. No tattoos announcing a clan, no secret gestures exchanged in crowded streets, no jewelry, no piece of clothing that marked the wearer as anything other than what they claimed to be. The ninjas' security depended on leaving nothing to find. Search their belongings, and you should discover only what matched the cover. Even specialized tools had to look ordinary. A farming implement that hid a blade, prayer beads that could serve as a garrote, a merchant's measuring stick that was something else entirely. Living this way fractured the mind. The ninja existed as multiple people, and none of them could be fully real. The farmer had neighbors, debts, routines, and petty worries. The merchant had different contacts, different speech, different knowledge. The monk moved with a different cadence, spoke with different restraint. These lives could not overlap. Memory had to be compartmentalized so completely that even under interrogation, under pain, one identity would not contaminate another. It demanded a flexibility that brushed against dissociation, the ability to become someone else so thoroughly that, for a time, the performance became true. Every relationship rested on false foundations. The farmer's neighbors, who shared meals and helped with harvests, believed they knew him. They did not. The merchant's regular customers who joked with him and trusted his word were speaking to a crafted version. Even romance became dangerous. It could be genuine, meaning the partner remained ignorant, always kept outside the truth. Or it could be operational, meaning another person's affection was reduced to a tool. Either path carried poison. One required constant concealment. The other demanded a kind of cruelty that left stains no water could wash away. Daily life became an accumulation of lies so constant that truth felt unfamiliar. What did you do yesterday? A lie. Where are you traveling next week? A lie. Why do you sometimes vanish for days? A lie wrapped in plausible details drawn from the cover's natural patterns. The ninja learned to lie with the reflexive ease most people reserved for breathing. Hesitation invited suspicion. Over-explanation created fragile details that had to be remembered and defended. The best lies were simple, dull, and perfectly consistent with the life being played. Trust became a luxury that could kill. A ninja might work alongside other operatives for years without knowing their real names or seeing their true faces. Information stayed compartmentalized, so the capture of one person wouldn't collapse the entire network. Even in families that served as ninja for generations, certain secrets remained sealed until the moment they became necessary. The default state was not paranoia, it was calculation. The hard knowledge that any bond could be penetrated, coerced, or turned. And that created an isolation deeper than solitude. A ninja could be surrounded by people, working beside them, eating with them, even sleeping next to them, while remaining fundamentally alone. The person others knew was a construction. The person beneath had no social existence. They were a function wrapped in human appearance, moving through society like a needle through fabric, touching everything, belonging to nothing. The cost accumulated over years. Some began to forget which version of themselves came first. Others kept such rigid separation between identities that they became different people depending on the room they stood in. The most successful found a strange freedom in having no fixed self. If you were nothing in particular, you could become whatever the mission required. But freedom like that carried a price few outside this hidden world could understand. To live without being seen was to live without being known. And to live without being known was to stare into a quiet question day after day. If no one truly knows you, did you ever exist at all? The children born into this shadow world never had a choice about the life they would lead. Ninja clans existed in plain sight while remaining completely invisible. They were not marked on maps. No official record acknowledged them. Entire family lines, stretching across generations, operated in the gaps between documented society, passing down knowledge that could never be written, maintaining networks that left no footprint in history's archives. These families were bound not by pride in a name, but by the necessity of keeping that name hidden. Hidden clans clustered in regions where the land itself favored secrecy. The mountainous terrain of Iga and Koga offered natural barriers against casual observation and organized incursion. Villages appeared ordinary, farmers in the fields, craftsmen at their benches, families living lives indistinguishable from any other rural community. But beneath the surface were training spaces, weapons caches, and quiet systems of communication linking operatives across feudal Japan. The landscape became complicit, caves used as meeting rooms, forest paths known only to those initiated into the clan's rules. In this world, marriage was not romance, it was infrastructure. When two ninja families joined through marriage, they formed operational alliances, widened intelligence lines, and ensured the survival of specialized skills. A daughter brought techniques refined over generations. A son, marrying into a family with different regional access, opened new ground for movement and contact. These unions were negotiated with the same cold precision daimyos used for political alliances, except they happened in silence, without ceremony, without witnesses beyond those who had to know. But strategic marriage carried its own dangers. Trust between clans was never complete. A spouse could also be an asset for their birth family. Children born from such unions carried divided loyalties in their blood. The intimate space of marriage became another point of compromise, where a careless word in the dark could expose operational details, and where genuine affection created vulnerabilities enemies could exploit. Children born into ninja families began training before they could understand what was being shaped inside them. A toddler taught to step without sound was being prepared for infiltration. A child trained to observe and remember was being groomed for intelligence. Games that built balance and coordination were drills disguised as play. By the time these children were old enough to question their upbringing, the skills and the mindset were already too deep to pull out. At first, the training was not presented as forbidden. It was simply life. A child did not learn they were being trained as a ninja. They learned the family craft the way a blacksmith's child learned metalwork, or a farmer's child learned cultivation. Techniques were woven into daily routine until they became reflex. Only gradually did the child understand that their craft could never be spoken beyond the household, and that what they carried made them different in ways that had to remain forever concealed. Family secrets built up across generations like sediment turning to stone. Each generation added techniques, refined methods, updated intelligence about rival clans and shifting threats, but none of it could be written down. The risk was too great. One captured document could expose networks, reveal methods that had taken decades to perfect, and identify families whose survival depended on anonymity. Written records were evidence, something that could be found, stolen, and used like a blade against the throat. So knowledge traveled by voice and memory. Masters taught through demonstration and repetition. Children memorized poems and songs that carried tactical information inside metaphor. Stories passed down across generations held embedded lessons. What worked, what failed, what cost lives. The tradition was fragile, vulnerable to death and forgetting, but it was also difficult to seize. No paper to confiscate, no archive to raid, only living minds. That absence of records made their world profoundly vulnerable. When a master died unexpectedly, techniques could vanish. When a family was exterminated, entire branches of specialized knowledge disappeared with them. The ninja way of life existed only as living practice, which meant it could be erased if enough practitioners were killed at once. Every clan understood this, and it created a constant pressure. Pass the knowledge down early, before it could be taken by a sudden night. Betrayal haunted every family. The temptation to sell information to a rival clan, to a feudal lord, was always present. One member breaking silence could destroy generations of concealment. Families responded with internal security, hierarchies of knowledge, where lower members knew only what their work demanded. verification rituals to confirm loyalty, brutal protocols for suspected traitors, but no system could erase the simplest truth. Every family member was a possible point of failure. The fear of betrayal seeped into the home. Parents watched children for signs of weakness. Siblings competed while wondering what the other might do under pressure. Extended relatives were measured constantly for discretion and commitment. Love existed, real affection, real loyalty, but it always carried a shadow. Any weakness in one person threatened everyone. Emotional bonds became liabilities that had to be managed alongside the mission. Silence was not just taught, it was inherited. Children absorbed from infancy that certain things were never discussed, never questioned, never acknowledged outside the circle. This enforced silence shaped them. Ninja children learned to compartmentalize automatically, to recognize which thoughts could be spoken and which had to stay locked behind the teeth. They developed an instinct for context, knowing without being told when it was safe to be themselves and when they had to become whatever their cover required. That inheritance went beyond technique. It shaped personality, worldview, even the capacity for ordinary relationships. The ninja family produced individuals who were deeply bonded to blood relatives and profoundly isolated from the broader human world. Intimacy existed only within a narrow circle of those who shared the same danger. Everyone else was potential threat, potential target, or useful resource, never fully real in the way family was real. These bonds were stronger than steel and more brittle than glass. Families displayed absolute loyalty because they had no one else. They protected each other with ferocity because external society offered no protection to those it refused to acknowledge. But the same conditions that forged loyalty also made them vulnerable to total destruction. If a rival clan found a family's location, it could be erased. If a lord decided a family knew too much, extermination could be ordered without consequence. To live as a family that could never be known meant living in permanent threat mitigation. Each generation had to be trained, secured, and prepared to continue if the current one was eliminated. Each child had to be capable of disappearing if the cover collapsed. Each member had to be ready to deny relationships, abandon home, and rebuild a life under a new name if survival demanded it. But even perfect secrecy inside the home could not fully prepare the young for what waited beyond it when their education truly began. Darkness was the ninja's classroom, while samurai trained in daylight courtyards where skill could be witnessed and admired. Ninja training unfolded when legitimate society slept. Sessions began after sunset and often ran until the edge of dawn, reshaping a student's body clock to match the life ahead. They learned to navigate by starlight, judge distance without light, move across ground where one misstep meant injury or discovery. Night stopped being a threat. It became home, a place where they held an advantage others never learned to claim. The exhaustion this created was not a flaw. It was part of the design. A ninja had to function while sleep-deprived, holding a cover by day, operating by night, and never letting fatigue show in a way that invited questions. Training mirrored reality, long stretches of ordinary life, punctured by moments of intense demand where failure was not permitted. Students learned to steal rest in brief intervals, to stay sharp through haze and hunger, to carry themselves as if their nights were empty. Nature became their training ground because nature was where operations happened. Mountains taught climbing and navigation. Rivers taught swimming with equipment and crossing without leaving a signature behind. Forests taught silent movement through undergrowth and the art of blending into organic shadow. Unlike manicured yards where techniques could be perfected in controlled conditions, these spaces refused control. They shifted with weather, with season, with chance. The student learned adaptability, not mastery of one clean environment, but competence in whatever terrain the mission required. The natural world also hid what could never be witnessed. A group practicing infiltration in the trees looked like hunters or men gathering wood. Students running mountain trails could claim trap lines or the search for medicinal herbs. Training in streams was indistinguishable from bathing or fishing to any casual observer. Their preparation was folded into civilian routine so tightly that even if someone watched, nothing appeared worth remembering. Disguise was not treated as a special skill, saved for rare moments. It was woven into daily existence until it became reflex. Students practiced holding personas for long periods, merchant, monk, servant, craftsman, until the performance required no conscious effort. They learned the vocabularies and mannerisms of different classes, the dialects that revealed origin, the small habits that made an identity believable. A student might spend weeks living as one character, never breaking role even among fellow trainees, until the disguise became an alternate self. This constant practice created a strange flexibility. Identity became something a trainee could shift as easily as clothing, changing not only posture and speech, but mindset. They studied how merchants calculated profit and risk, how servants watched their masters, how monks framed suffering and restraint. Immersion in these roles prepared them for the fragmented existence ahead, where the true self was only one more mask among many. Physical endurance was driven past ordinary limits. Students ran until legs trembled, climbed until fingers split, held positions until muscles screamed. But unlike martial training that worshipped perfect technique, ninja training emphasized function when technique broke down. An exhausted body still had to climb a wall without sound, swim a moat, flee through rough terrain without leaving a trail. The goal was not elegance. The goal was continuity, moving, breathing, surviving when the body begged to stop. Pain tolerance was cultivated the same way, systematically. They learned to ignore discomfort that would pull another person's attention loose, to function while injured, to suppress involuntary reactions that could betray position. They practiced stillness for hours, despite cramps and insect bites. They learned to control breath and heart rate under stress, to keep the body quiet, even when the mind was burning. Emotional control was harder. Fear was natural, but it could not be displayed. Anger was understandable, but it had to be contained. Even pride and satisfaction were threats, because they loosen discipline and invite disclosure. Training was designed to provoke response, humiliation, terror, rage, while demanding perfect composure. Students learned to treat emotion as information rather than instruction, to observe their own state from a distance while choosing actions based on necessity, not feeling. Observation became constant practice, even during the most mundane tasks. Students learned to notice changes in a space, patterns in behavior, inconsistencies that signaled danger or opportunity. They trained to describe rooms in detail after brief exposure, to identify people by traits that endured through costume and posture, to read body language that contradicted spoken words. This vigilance became automatic. The ninja turned into a living instrument, recording, comparing, calculating without pause. But they also learned what not to see. Not every detail mattered, and some details were traps. They learned to ignore tempting targets outside mission parameters, to overlook slights that could bait them into reactive violence, to hold focus through provocation. Knowing what to discard was as critical as knowing what to collect. Mistakes in training carried consequences meant to burn the lesson into bone. Excessive noise during infiltration might mean a strike, or hunger used as correction. More serious errors, compromising another student's cover, failing basic security, brought severe punishment or removal from training for a time. The gravest mistakes, those that threatened the clan itself, sometimes ended in execution. It was not framed as cruelty, it was framed as necessity. An operative who could not learn would eventually make an error in the field that killed others. The threat of death was not distant. It sat in the training itself. Students understood their teachers could kill them if they proved incapable of secrecy and discipline. Pressure was constant, not theatrical. Failure did not mean shame. It could mean annihilation. Training became a filter, removing those without the fortitude to live inside permanent danger. And perhaps the most essential skill was learning how to disappear. Students practiced abandoning identities, destroying evidence, vanishing into new lives with no visible connection to the old. They maintained emergency caches, money, tools, supplies, hidden for sudden flight. They memorized escape routes from every place they spent time. They trained the mind to sever attachment instantly, to walk away from familiar faces and familiar rooms and never look back. This was tested without warning. A student would be told their cover was compromised and given 1 hour to vanish completely. Those who hesitated, who gathered personal items, who reached for comfort, who tried to say goodbye, failed. Success meant becoming a ghost, leaving behind only the shape of a person who had been there and nothing that explained where they went or who they truly were. Yet even the most rigorous training could not fully prepare them for what waited beyond technique, what their missions would demand of their conscience. The samurai lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior that raised honor above life itself. The code demanded courage in battle, loyalty to one's lord, and death before disgrace. A samurai who violated these principles lost more than status. Their name was stained. Their family carried the shame. Seppuku stood as the only sanctioned path to restore what had been broken. This was the moral architecture of warrior virtue in feudal Japan. The ninja stood entirely outside it. Bushido required a warrior to be seen. Before combat, a samurai announced his name, lineage, and lord, turning violence into ritual, killing shaped into contest, a test of skill with rules both sides recognized. The ninja struck without ceremony, from behind, from darkness, from positions where the target had no chance to defend or even understand what was happening. There was no declaration, no fair exchange, no honor in method. There was only the mission and its completion. The samurai code treated deception as corruption. A warrior's word was supposed to be sacred. Lying fractured trust and marked the liar as contemptible. The ninja's life, by necessity, was built on lies: identity, purpose, loyalty, alibi. Deception was not a moral failure to avoid. It was the core instrument of the work, used more often than the blade. In place of absolute codes came pragmatic morality. The ninja did not ask, "Is this honorable?" They asked, "Will this accomplish the mission?" If poison eliminated a target more reliably than a direct assault, poison was correct. If seduction opened a fortress, seduction was appropriate. If burning a temple full of civilians created enough chaos to cover an assassination, the temple burned. Right and wrong were measured by outcome, not by principle. To a samurai mind, this flexibility was not merely wrong, it was sickening. Some methods were worse than failure. Better to die with honor than live through shame. The ninja reversed the equation. Survival enabled future missions. Success served the Lord's interests regardless of the pathway. Death accomplished nothing except satisfying ideals that had no place in asymmetric war. Mission success eclipsed personal reputation because the ninja had no public reputation to guard. A samurai built identity through witness deeds, glory carried by names others could repeat. The ninja's achievements could never be acknowledged. They completed operations that shifted wars and toppled powerful families, yet received no open honor, no legacy beyond payment, no place in the record. Their effectiveness depended on that absence. Glory would have been proof of failure, and that absence created a strange kind of freedom. A ninja could not be publicly shamed because they had no public face to tarnish. They could not lose honor because society granted them none to begin with. But freedom like this came with a cost. They were cut off from the systems of meaning that gave other warriors purpose. Where samurai found identity in honored service and glorious death, ninja found meaning only in the work itself, the hard satisfaction of completion. Lying became not just acceptable, but virtuous when it protected the mission. The ninja who lied, well-protected family, advanced objectives, preserved survival. Truth that compromised security became the real moral failure. Honesty turned conditional, sometimes useful, often dangerous, always subordinate to necessity. To samurai eyes, the ninja was cowardice made flesh, attacking from concealment instead of facing an opponent directly, using poison instead of steel, fleeing instead of dying, disguising oneself as peasant or servant instead of wearing armor that announced pride. These methods violated everything samurai culture praised as masculine virtue. The ninja was not only an enemy, he was a distortion of what a warrior should be. But the accusation of cowardice held little power over those who understood their function. Courage meant different things in different worlds. For a samurai, courage was charging toward death with witnesses watching. For a ninja, courage was living for years in deep cover, holding discipline under torture, entering spaces where discovery meant execution and no one would ever sing of it. Both faced death. Only one did it in silence. Efficiency replaced glory as the highest value. Outcomes were everything. Target removed, intelligence gathered, mission completed, regardless of how it was achieved. A mission accomplished through ruse was often superior to one that required violence because it left fewer traces and created less risk. The cleanest operation was the one no one realized had occurred. This was excellence in a form Bushido could not recognize and would never respect. Survival itself became virtue. The ninja who lived to complete another mission served their purpose. The one who died beautifully served nothing. Retreat, so shameful in samurai eyes, was often correct. Running from a fight you could not win was not dishonor, it was competence. Remaining alive, even if branded a coward by those who misunderstood, meant being available for the next operation. And that availability had value that surpassed social judgment. Contempt followed them everywhere. Samurai despised them as dishonorable beings who reduced war to assassination. Civilians feared them as treachery given human shape, violence unbound by the usual rules. Even the lords who hired them looked down on them, using their services while keeping distance, as if proximity itself could spread contamination. The ninja was useful, never respected, necessary and disposable. That contempt forged its own kind of solidarity. Ninja lived in a moral universe, separate from conventional society, where the usual judgments had no authority. Among operatives, what earned samurai scorn became professional achievement. The lie that fooled an entire household was praised in private. The death that looked like illness was recognized as mastery. In hidden communities, they built standards that inverted mainstream values, yet living outside honor's framework carved deeper wounds than social isolation. The human need to justify oneself does not vanish easily. Some ninja created rationalizations. They served their lord as faithfully as any samurai, only through different means. Others embraced nihilism, deciding honor was illusion and only power mattered. Many simply compartmentalized, pragmatic during missions, searching for meaning in whatever remained of life beyond the work. The younger generation, raised inside this ambiguity, sometimes broke against the contradiction. They were trained to do what their lords demanded, then taught by surrounding culture to despise the methods that made those demands possible. They understood they were hated for fulfilling orders. They knew they violated principles presented as absolute. Some survived through rigid separation of selves. Others carried the split like a crack that never stopped widening. But the deepest cost was the one no one could see. A samurai accused of dishonorable behavior could defend himself, appeal to Bushido, restore reputation through explanation or compensating deeds. The ninja could never explain. Their methods had to remain secret even when judged. They endured contempt in silence, unable to speak the logic that governed their choices or prove the courage their work required. And that silence pressed into them for survival did not just create resentment. It created something sharper, something even the lords who employed them could not fully control. Fear and respect obey different laws. Respect grows from visible virtue, courage displayed in open battle, loyalty proven through public service, strength tested in witnessed contests. Fear grows from invisible threat, danger that cannot be anticipated, violence that arrives without warning, enemies who cannot be identified or confronted. The ninja mastered that second domain so completely they became an embodiment of dread for anyone with reason to fear them. Invisible attacks violated the basic grammar of war. When armies clashed, both sides saw the enemy coming. Defenders watched from walls as besieging forces assembled. Warriors faced each other across fields where skill and courage shaped outcomes. Even when terrifying, it was comprehensible, cause and effect in daylight. Ninja attacks offered no such structure. A lord went to sleep and never woke. A general died from poison given by someone inside his own household. A castle's main tower burned, while guards swore they saw no intruder. Death arrived without declaration, without visible agent, without anything that allowed preparation or defense. That invisibility turned assassination into something that felt supernatural. When samurai killed, the method and the killer were known. When ninja killed, certainty collapsed. Was it murder or illness? Was there truly an infiltrator or betrayal from within? Had defenses been penetrated, or had misfortune simply chosen its victim? When no answer could be trusted, every misfortune became evidence. Their reputation expanded beyond their actual reach, because fear does not need proof, it only needs doubt. Information warfare was their truest weapon. Ninja gathered intelligence lords could not obtain through ordinary channels. Secret alliances, true troop strength, private weaknesses. This knowledge flowed upward to employers while remaining unseen by those it concerned. A daimyo might believe his plans were secure, while an enemy already held them in his hand. The result was justified paranoia. You could not know which secrets had been compromised or how deeply. The psychological damage often exceeded the value of the information itself. The mere possibility of being watched poisoned daily life. Private conversations became suspect. Trusted servants became possible spies. Even family members became potential informants. This erosion of trust inside the inner circles of power was what made ninja dangerous. They did not need to kill to cripple a target. The idea of their presence was enough to corrode the relationships that rulers depended on. Psychological warfare went further than listening and reporting. Ninja planted false information meant to seed suspicion between allies. They staged incidents that looked like betrayal, turning Confederates against each other. They arranged events that made enemies question their own judgment and perception. A lord who cannot trust his information, his allies, or even his eyes is already defeated long before armies meet. Ninja won battles in the shadows of the mind, where doubt and fear cut deeper than steel. The absence of authorship made every operation more terrifying. When a samurai killed, the killer's identity was known. The victim's family could seek revenge. The lord behind it could be held accountable. Justice, however brutal, had channels. Ninja work left no clarity. An assassination had no author to blame, no family to curse, no lord to demand restitution from. Violence simply happened, causeless and consequence-free for those who delivered it. With no accountability, there was no deterrent, no path to closure, no clean end. Anonymous violence produces a special helplessness. You can guard against a known enemy, prepare for expected attacks, strike back when harmed. Against faceless ninja, no precaution felt sufficient, and retaliation often felt impossible. They became pure threat without embodied form, danger that could materialize anywhere, at any time, against anyone who drew the wrong attention. It was fear at its most primal, the hunted animal sensing a predator it cannot see. For those who might be targeted, paranoia became permanent. Officials lived with the knowledge that household staff could include operatives. Daimyos understood their closest advisors might report to rivals. Commanders suspected their strategies were known before they were ever used. Daily life rotted into suspicion. Routine interactions turned sharp. Relaxation became irresponsible. The ninja succeeded when their targets lived in fear, even during moments of complete safety. The enemy within was more terrifying than any external force. Castles could be fortified against armies. Borders could be patrolled against invaders. But infiltrators were already inside, disguised as servants who had worked loyally for years, merchants trusted across generations, monks who had heard confessions and accepted the family's private truths. Walls that protected against outsiders meant nothing against those welcomed through the gate under false names. Every person with access became a question mark. The Lord became a prisoner of suspicion inside a fortress that could not protect him. That internal threat destroyed the possibility of genuine loyalty. A lord who suspects everyone cannot fully trust anyone. Servants under suspicion grow resentful. Retainers whose loyalty is doubted begin to withhold it. Paranoia becomes self-fulfilling. Suspicion damages relationships until betrayal becomes more likely, justifying the fear that created it. The ninja did not need to infiltrate every household. The belief that they might was enough. Power without identity was the most disturbing part of their work. Authority traditionally belonged to those who could be seen. The daimyo in his castle, the shogun in his capital, the emperor in his court. Their commands had authors. Their will had a source. Ninja power moved differently. It manifested as events with no visible hand, decisions reversed without explanation, alliances dissolving, crucial information arriving to enemies at precisely the wrong moment. Power moved like wind, felt in its effects, absent in its form. And because it had no face, it could not be confronted. You could challenge a daimyo, refuse a shogun, rebel against an emperor, because those powers were embodied. But how do you resist an enemy you cannot identify? How do you fight a threat with no fixed location and no acknowledged existence? Ninja invisibility was not only advantage, it was a kind of protection. They could strike without inviting direct counterstrike because there was no them to strike back. Around that faceless power, silent hatred accumulated. Those who survived ninja work, or simply lived under its shadow, developed a visceral loathing. But hatred without a target devours the one who carries it. The rage had nowhere to go, no outlet, no satisfaction through revenge. That impotent fury became another weapon. Enemies exhausted themselves with useless hatred while ninja moved on, unaffected, unseen. Contempt and terror coexisted in a tense contradiction. Society despised ninja as dishonorable and cowardly, while fearing them as nearly omnipotent. The contradiction exposed an uncomfortable truth. Honor is a luxury of those who fight visible battles under recognized rules. Against an enemy who refuses those rules, honor offers no protection. Samurai disdained ninja methods while failing to defend against them, and that impotence beneath the contempt bred additional fear. Even the lords who employed ninja lived inside the same contradiction. They needed the results and feared the capability. A tool powerful enough to destroy your enemies is powerful enough to destroy you. Every daimyo who used ninja services understood the risk. These same operatives could be turned. These same methods could penetrate their own household. These same shadows could move for a rival. And as fear grew, it became inevitable that their usefulness would one day be judged as more dangerous than their absence. The ninja who executed perfect missions, who shifted wars, removed threats armies could not reach, often died without their names ever being recorded. No monuments marked their graves, no songs carried their deeds. No official history acknowledged they had lived at all. They worked in shadow and were buried there, their contributions erased as completely as their identities had been concealed. This was the cost of effectiveness through invisibility, achievement that could never be claimed. Fame requires witnesses and records. Samurai who died openly became legends because others saw their courage and poets preserved it. Families displayed armor and weapons as proof of an ancestor's valor. Names were inscribed in temple registers and military chronicles. Each generation could point backward and find meaning in the chain of honored dead. Ninja families had no such comfort. Their most successful ancestors were those about whom nothing could be said, whose greatest work had to remain secret forever. Public legacy was impossible for those whose existence itself was classified knowledge. A samurai's descendants inherited not only property but reputation, the social capital built through generations of visible service. Ninja descendants inherited only the continuing necessity of silence. They could not claim what their family had done without exposing methods, revealing networks, endangering those still alive. The past had to remain hidden like the present, generation after generation trained to protect an absence. That absence hollowed out something human. People find purpose in the belief that what they do will be remembered, that their suffering contributes to something larger than a single life. Ninja worked knowing their contributions would be deliberately forgotten. The mission that saved a domain would be attributed to luck, to divine favor, to a lord's own cunning, never to the operative who made it possible. Erasure was operational security. It was also a denial of consolation. Their sacrifices mattered only in the moment they were useful. Inside the clans, betrayal was the threat that ruined what secrecy built. The pressure of hidden lives, the temptation of reward for breaking silence, and ordinary human weakness produced informants. One betrayer could expose training methods, reveal safe houses, identify operatives who believed their covers were secure. And once that first crack formed, damage cascaded. Networks unraveling in days what had taken years to build. Betrayals came from anywhere. Sometimes from young operatives who resented the life imposed on them, who wanted ordinary existence more than clan loyalty. Sometimes from senior members who calculated cooperation with authorities offered better odds than continued independence. Sometimes from simple fracture, capture and torture until a person broke and spoke what they had sworn to die with. The cause varied. The result was the same. Catastrophe for families whose survival depended on absolute silence. As Japan moved toward centralization, extermination became policy. Ninja clans were autonomous power centers operating outside official authority. As the Tokugawa shogunate consolidated control, independent networks became intolerable threats rather than useful tools. What had once been covert assets turned into targets. Military forces descended on known strongholds with orders to erase everything that might contain clan knowledge, killing not only fighters but entire family lines. The destruction of Iga province in 1581 revealed that brutality without disguise. Oda Nobunaga's forces invaded with overwhelming numbers, systematically destroying villages suspected of harboring ninja families. Thousands died, survivors fled, clan structures shattered, training grounds burned, lineages scattered. It was not a campaign against an army in formation. It was the eradication of a way of life that had become politically inconvenient. Some clans avoided extermination through absorption into the state. The Tokugawa recognized that ninja skills were still useful, even if autonomous ninja organizations were unacceptable. Certain families were given a choice: disband and be destroyed, or enter official service under state control. Those who accepted traded independence for survival. They became part of the shogunate's intelligence apparatus, their methods now deployed for a single authority rather than sold to whoever paid. That absorption changed the ninja at the root. State service meant oversight, hierarchy, missions that were no longer entirely untraceable. Their invisibility remained tactically, silent movement, hidden work, but it vanished strategically. The state knew who they were, where they operated, what they did. They became instruments of central power rather than independent operators, autonomy sacrificed for security. There was no space left for those who refused. Clans that held to independence were hunted systematically. State resources dwarfed anything a family network could withstand. Worse, former ninja now working for the shogunate carried intimate knowledge of the methods that had protected these clans for generations. Holdouts were identified, infiltrated, eliminated. By the mid-17th century, the autonomous tradition was effectively dead. History erased them with a thoroughness that mirrored their own techniques. Official records minimized or denied ninja involvement. Victories shaped by invisible operations were attributed to conventional military action or political maneuvering. The shadow workers who had influenced the feudal era vanished from documentation as completely as they once vanished into night. Later historians, reading official sources, found almost nothing that proved ninja had existed as organized forces. That erasure was partly deliberate. The shogunate had no incentive to preserve methods it wished to monopolize, and partly the natural result of ninja secrecy. Clans that kept no written records left nothing to discover. Operatives using false identities appeared in documents as the people they pretended to be. Missions designed to leave no trace produced exactly that. Nothing for later investigation. They had made themselves undetectable so thoroughly that they remained invisible even to history. In the vacuum, myth rushed in. Without reliable detail, popular imagination created fantastical versions. Supernatural invisibility, flight, transformation, command over natural forces. These legends had little to do with the pragmatic reality, but they served a function. Myth drew attention away from what had been true, burying operational knowledge under impossible spectacle. That replacement of reality with fiction became the final erasure. The actual ninja, families living double lives, operatives surviving through discipline rather than magic, intelligence that shaped feudal conflicts, disappeared beneath layers of entertainment. Popular culture embraced the mystical assassin and forgot the historical operative. What the shogunate began through extermination and absorption, myth finished through distortion. The end of invisibility did not arrive through exposure. It arrived through extinction. The ninja survived for centuries by remaining unseen, but that same invisibility made it possible to remove them from history without leaving a scar. When the last clans were destroyed or absorbed, when the final autonomous operatives died, without passing on what they knew, the tradition ended without fanfare. No final battle, no last stand, only gradual absence, until one day there were no ninja left, only stories about what ninja might have been. Those descendants who survived into the modern era carried a strange burden. They held fragments of lineage, but most knowledge was gone. They knew their family history touched something significant, yet the specifics had been deliberately erased. They lived with a quiet awareness of deeds that could never be discussed, achievements that could never be claimed, sacrifices that would never be acknowledged. The cost of the hidden life did not stop with the dead. It traveled forward, producing descendants who inherited absence instead of legacy. But something did survive the extermination and the erasure, something that would prove the ninjas' influence had reached further than their enemies ever understood. The techniques survived even when the clans did not. Knowledge that had lived in families and hidden schools found new carriers in unexpected places. Former ninja absorbed into state service taught methods to government operatives who would never bear the ninja name. Descendants who escaped extermination preserved fragments of training in altered forms. Martial artists absorbed pieces of movement and strategy into their own systems without naming the source. The methods dispersed like seeds on wind, separated from their origin, but still viable, still taking root. Those inherited principles became the foundation of modern espionage, deep cover identities, intelligence gathered through human sources embedded in target organizations, deception and misdirection preferred over direct confrontation. What ninja refined over centuries became standard tradecraft for agencies that would later be called by other names. The doctrine of invisibility lived on in operatives who would never know they were repeating patterns perfected in feudal Japan. State surveillance evolved from the same logic. The Tokugawa shogunate's spy apparatus, strengthened through the absorption of ninja clans, established precedents for systematic monitoring. Officials stationed across domains reported local activity. Informants entered merchant guilds, religious communities, family networks. What had once been covert technique hardened into permanent infrastructure. The hidden watcher was not eliminated. It was institutionalized. Modern technology amplified these methods beyond anything feudal ninja could have imagined. Electronic monitoring replaced human eyes, but served the same purpose: gather information on targets who remain unaware, identify threats before they surface, maintain control through oversight that is everywhere and nowhere at once. The ninja principle, seeing without being seen, found an ultimate form in surveillance that watches constantly while remaining invisible to those it observes. Warfare followed the same drift toward facelessness, cyber attacks launched by unnamed actors serving unnamed governments, economic pressure applied through manipulation with no clear author, disinformation that destabilizes societies while leaving only confusion behind. Targeted killings carried out by remote systems, operated by people who never step into the target's world. These are not the same tools, but the same logic. Disruption without exposure, violence without signature, action protected by deniability. This kind of conflict would have felt familiar to a feudal ninja. Operations succeed precisely because no one can definitively identify who carried them out. Attribution becomes a forensic argument rather than a fact. Retaliation becomes complicated by uncertainty. Invisibility creates strategic advantage, the ability to strike without opening yourself to direct counterstrike, to shape events while refusing responsibility for consequences, to wield power while remaining personally untouchable. Over time, the ninja became a cultural archetype that drifted far beyond historical reality. The shadow warrior, disciplined, lethal, operating outside ordinary rules, reappeared in endless variations. The spy who serves a state through methods the public can never know. The special operations soldier who fights classified wars. The hacker who exposes power while hiding behind anonymity. The template persisted because the need it represents persisted, effective action that must remain unseen. That archetype granted a form of immortality the historical ninja never received. Millions recognized the concept while knowing almost nothing of the real lives behind it. The fiction became more familiar than the history, an image that allowed societies to discuss secrecy, power, and invisible violence at a safe distance. The myth made the uncomfortable speakable while keeping the practical mechanics hidden. In that way, mythology protected what secrecy alone could not. Fantastic stories, supernatural powers, impossible feats pulled attention away from the unglamorous reality of tradecraft. Observation, infiltration, manipulation, patience. Investigators chased legend through smoke, while the practical methods remained obscure. The public consumed the magical assassin and overlooked the operative. That misdirection served those who benefited from inherited techniques. As long as ninja methods were associated with fantasy, the real methods stayed underestimated. Adversaries prepared for spectacle and missed the mundane. Quiet access, compromised trust, information stolen by someone who looked harmless. The myth became counterintelligence at cultural scale. Attention guided toward the impossible so the real could keep working. Beneath the myth, fragments of truth persisted. Scholars who returned to primary sources found evidence of operational ninja that looked nothing like popular imagination. Manuals that survived destruction described practical techniques, not mysticism. Records of operations revealed planning, discipline, realism, not supernatural intervention. But these truths struggled for oxygen beside stories that were more entertaining, more dramatic, easier to sell. The real legacy was not spectacle, it was a philosophy of conflict. Ninja understood that victory achieved invisibly was more valuable than glory achieved openly. They recognized information as power. They valued patience and preparation over display. They accepted that the most effective work often looks like nothing at all. Stripped of embellishment, these were insights about asymmetric conflict that remained relevant across centuries, even as tools changed. Modern special operations forces embody the same logic, whether they acknowledge any connection or not. Small teams, minimal visibility, intelligence first, precision over mass, methods conventional ethics sometimes struggle to name, an understanding that effectiveness matters more than recognition. The principles align because the conditions align. Visibility still invites failure, and secrecy still creates advantage. The shadows never disappeared. They changed shape. Feudal darkness became the administrative darkness of classified files and redacted pages. Physical invisibility became bureaucratic invisibility, operations that exist only in compartments. The fear of assassins in the night evolved into the awareness of surveillance systems, cyber intrusions, and targeted operations that can materialize without warning. Those who work inside modern shadows pay costs that echo the old ones. Intelligence operatives live double lives that fracture authentic relationships. Special operations personnel complete missions that can never be publicly acknowledged. Cyber operators succeed only by remaining unknown. All trade ordinary life for effectiveness in a domain where visibility equals defeat. Techniques evolve. The bargain stays the same, power in exchange for anonymity. That was the secret that survived. Not a specific weapon, not a supernatural trick. The understanding that invisible actors can shape visible history, and that the most significant battles often unfold where the public will never look, fought by people whose names will never be spoken. The historical ninja were destroyed, absorbed, and erased from the record. But their logic endured. The shadow warriors never truly vanished. They simply learned new ways to remain unseen. The ninja were not warriors seeking glory. They were survivors trained to disappear, and that is why history almost erased them. Would you rather be remembered or survive unseen? Comment below.